and welcome to this afternoon webinar session on this Chemicals and Waste Management Community of Practice. I am Pierre Quiblier, and it is a pleasure for me to welcome you this afternoon to this community of practice. I am currently the officer in charge of the SAICM Secretariat within the Chemicals and Health branch of the UN program. Have been working now for many years at the intersections of health and environment management, as well as environment and development. I've been at the origin of the Global Chemicals Outlook and of many other projects at the intersections of this health and environment linkages. Today, our discussion will focus on the integrated chemicals and waste management in the lead up to ICCM5, national systems, industry actions, and SDG implementations, three dimensions that are key in our programmatic framework envisaged to be adopted at ICCM5. And we will have today with us one of the greatest experts we can have in this field is Hakim, and I'll come back in a second to introduce him. Today discussion is the first in the series of discussion in 2023 on issues of concerns, chemicals of concern across diverse supply chains, capacity building, and other relevant topics led by the SAICM Secretariat. For those who are not that familiar and would be joining for the first time this community of practice, let me remind you of this community of practice. In 2020, SAICM established 4 community of practices, one on highly hazardous pesticides, one on chemicals in products, one on lead in paint, and one on chemicals and the sustainable development goals. All these discussions have led to very successful knowledge exchanges. And while the activities of these community came to an end in 2022, the SAICM Secretariat, in light of the success of the previous one, is continuing the momentum with a single all-inclusive community of practice on chemicals and waste management in partnership with the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, GGKP. The Chemicals and Waste Management Community of Practice has been established on the Green Forum. We would like to thank very much today to host ongoing active knowledge exchange before, during, and after these discussion sessions. So today, for this very important topic on integrated chemicals and waste management, we have Hakim Alpap. There's no need for all those who are familiar to chemicals management. There's no need to introduce Hakim. He is extremely well known with an extensive experience and leadership in the field of international environment and sustainable development research. He has been associate director at UNITAR. He has been the head of our chemicals and health branch. He has been the leader of the second chemicals outlook, global chemicals outlook. The academic background is impressive with University of Cape Town, Yale University, and University of Oregon. And Hakim has been the key element to introduce this very important programmatic integrated chemicals management within our ICCM and intersessional process. And it is a great pleasure for me to introduce you, Hakim. Hakim, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Pierre, for this very kind introduction. Greetings to all of you around the world participating in this session on integrated chemicals and waste management. As Pierre alluded to, we have a moment of history where we can shape the future of the global chemicals and waste policy. And ICCM5, the 5th International Conference on Chemical Management, is scheduled for the end of September of this year. And what we hope to achieve is something similar what we witnesses in the biodiversity context. Many of you may recall that just before the holiday season last year, a global framework on biodiversity was adopted with strategic goals and 23 targets. And the chemicals and waste community is in the same process right now. And we hope to have a similar sister framework in place at ICCM5. Now, the international organizations that are supporting this work, and that includes all the way from the World Bank to UNEP, to ILO, to UNDP, to UNITAR, and many others, have started to think about how can we make sure this global framework focuses on some of the most essential questions. So we went through a brainstorming together with stakeholders and came up with the concept that we refer to as integrated chemicals and waste management. And as Pierre alluded to, this has three important dimensions, which shape also the program of our webinar today. So thank you for UNDP and GGKP for organizing this webinar. We hope to get some feedback from you on some of the ideas generated, because we still have almost 6 months left to the important conference Pierre mentioned in Bonn, Germany. It's now up to stakeholders to shape the final moments to create a similar ambitious framework as we have seen in biodiversity. Now, we thought up front to ask you a little polling question. To what extent you are familiar with these negotiations on chemicals and waste management beyond 2020 and the strategic approach. So if you have now a moment, tell us a little bit, how familiar are you with this process leading up to ICCM5? Extremely familiar, very familiar, moderately, slightly, or not at all? So please fill out that little poll in the next minute, and then we get a sense. And depending on the answer, I'm sure also Pierre may be available to meet some of the gaps that may be there. But with this, I would like to give you a little bit the background for our work on integrated chemicals and waste management. And Pierre already alluded to the second Global Chemicals Management Outlook published by UNEP in 2019. A 700-page document which did a lot of analysis. Where do we stand globally in meeting the global goal and targets to achieve sound management of chemicals by the year 2020? And the clear answer was, we are not making the progress we intended to. We are not meeting this goal. And what are some of the key highlights that were issued by the Global Chemicals Outlook? First, the chemical industry continues to grow and again is expected to double by the year 2030. At the same time, some basic chemical management capacities and systems in countries are not yet in place. And this combination causes some concern. The outlook also said that this chemical by chemical approach and assessing the 100,000 of chemical on the market is very resource intensive, and a more strategic approach to dealing with chemicals is needed, grouping them, but also looking more at some of the industry sectors, which often use many or 100 chemicals in designing and producing their products. So a slightly move from chemical by chemical to industry sectors is warranted. And more ambitious action is needed. Business as usual is not an action. So the IMC looked at this result and picked up on a little seed on integrated chemical management was already planted in 2006, but further developed it. And I'm all going to speak to each of the three dimensions in a moment. But perhaps we do have some results of the first poll available. Gayon, are you able to? Okay, 21% extremely familiar. So about half of the participants are quite familiar, but also about half the participants are not familiar. Pierre, do you want to maybe just 2 or 3 minutes, kind of a 2 or 3 minute version of why this is so important, what's happening, what are the milestones, so that what I'm going to talk about fits into a little bit also the policy context better. Over to you, Pierre.
Thank you very much. Just a quick reminder that in 2015 at ICCM4, it was decided to create this intersessional process to prepare all SAICM stakeholders to provide recommendations for ICCM5 in light also of an evaluations that was made on the progress achieved and highlighting the strength and weaknesses of the SAICM process. It was decided so to have a set of intersessional meeting, and we are today in the fourth intersessional meeting. Very briefly to remind you, we had a first meeting of the intersessional process that was in 2017, and that was in Brasilia, in Brazil. The second one was in Sweden in 2018. The third meeting of the intersessional process was held in Bangkok, Thailand, in October 2019. We had the fourth intersessional process was at the same time as the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and we started a set of work on virtual working groups in order to maintain the momentum, in order to maintain the dynamic and the progress made in the development of this set of recommendations. Further to these virtual working groups and post-pandemic, we were able to meet again person to person, and the first meeting was held in Bucharest last summer at the end of August and beginning of September. And we achieved there one single consolidated document that provides the first set of recommendations that would be presented at ICCM5. ICCM5, which will be held in Bonn next fall at the end of the month of September. Out of Bucharest, we continued the work, held a number of regional consultations and regional briefings that led us to Nairobi last February, where we continued to consider the various important parts that would constitute the new framework, the new instruments that would be the outcome and adopted at Bonn next fall. There were a number of progress achieved in these two meetings, but we were unable to really achieve all the level of details in the recommendations, particularly as it relates to finance and as it relates to capacity building, as well as to target. So it was decided to have a third meeting of the fourth meeting of the intersessional process that would be held just prior to our ICCM5 process. In all this, what is very important is that this programmatic aspect that Akim and that we will have a pleasure to exchange ideas today upon is crucial. It is really what will provide the soul, the dynamism of these new instruments in light of the evaluation process that highlighted how to increase the involvement of key actors into the process, and particularly the industry, how we could shift again from this chemicals by chemicals approach to a much more strategic one in addressing key industry sectors was highlighted. And it is very important that this new instrument doesn't miss this opportunity to change a little bit our perspective and to reach greater progress in ensuring that we can maximize the benefits of our chemicals, while of course minimize its risks to the health and of our population and to the environment. Back to you, Akim. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pierre. And if I may ask for the next slide. Yeah, wonderful. So here you see the 3 dimensions of integrated and chemicals waste management, which we will discuss over the next 1.5 hours. At the core, you see a topic that has been on the international agenda for quite some time, and it requires continued and scaled up attention. And that is the development of basic national chemical management systems through intersectoral engagement in all countries. The next layer you see there in green is not a totally new dimension of international chemicals management, but it highlights that in addition to the chemical industry, the downstream chemical industry sectors such as textiles, electronics, building industry, agriculture, of course, are a major user of chemicals and therefore also need to play a much more important role in international negotiations. And the third circular pillar that you see in red is saying, okay, all of these efforts, of course, needs to be linked to and need to support implementation of the wide range of sustainable development goals, which are somehow dependent also on sound chemical management, or which can advance sound chemical management, waste management, and we'll go to this in a moment. As Pierre alluded to now, this information paper that the Inter-Organization Program for the Sound Chemicals Management developed for Bucharest is now being discussed also from a programmatic perspective. And the IMC in Nairobi submitted a conference room paper suggesting also implementation program on all these three dimensions. And this is something we're working on, and there will be one global workshop that is hosted by UNITA on behalf of the IMC. I believe it's on the 20th and 22nd of June, that will discuss in particular the elements of a possible program dealing on the second dimension of industry sector engagement. So there's momentum in going beyond the conceptual stage and talking about implementation program, but that is subject to final negotiations in Bonn. Next one, please. So here I'm just zooming in the first dimension. Next, please. So out of the many action items which have been identified earlier during the SAICM process, IMC tried to look at them and try to prioritize which really are the most important ones that need to get significant attention during this upcoming ICCM5. Number one is really that basic chemicals are properly classified and labeled in accordance with the globally harmonized systems for the classification and labeling of chemicals. And this is referred to as GHS. So this is a global system and it's ready, and countries are encouraged to implement that through guidelines or even regulations or standards. Secondly, we are suggesting that each country should be able to generate some basic knowledge about hazardous chemicals coming into the country, such as doing a chemical inventory and perhaps having a fee-based system so that chemicals being imported generate some income that could manage also chemical management systems. The third dimension is to make sure that both environment, labor, and health consideration are integrated into any assessment on the risks of chemicals. So the intersectoral approach is important. And finally, some effort is needed to really look at the life cycle of a chemical as it is used in developing products, as products have an end of use that time, and we need to make sure that proper recycling is taking place and also proper disposal of those materials that cannot be recycled. This is also happening. Next one, please. So in order to support these substantive priorities, the IMC has identified 5 enabling elements that governments and stakeholders are encouraged to put in place. You need, of course, the basic national institutional system, coordination and stakeholder engagement, then some basic legislation covering in particular the GHS and some product standards, then some intersectoral coordination so that some of the chemicals management work is linked to other environmental health related initiatives such as monitoring, epidemiology systems and waste management systems. A fourth enabling element is really thinking through how in the future can these systems be maintained. I already mentioned cost recovery as an opportunity, but there may be other avenues available, how countries can maintain such basic systems. And I think a very important element often ignored is really the putting in place sustainable human resource capacities, ability to develop legislation, enforcement schemes, human resource capacities in companies to do classification and labeling, and so on and so on. And the idea of a national learning strategy is promoted. So these are the basic elements in a nutshell. All of this is written up in detail in an information document, which is available on the website. But I guess now we are moving a little bit to the interactive part after this brief introduction, and we're moving to the discussion question. Over to you, Pierre.
Thank you very much, Hakim, for highlighting these very important actions and this very important enabling framework that are needed to strengthen these capacity at the national level. Now, with this national chemicals management system, the development of these basic national chemicals management systems and capacity in all countries has been on the international agenda for a long time, yet only limited progress has been made to date. What are the key determinants? Why progress has been so slow? How key challenges can be overcome, including securing innovative and sustainable financing to operate national systems? And we have here today we have today the polling questions, which is to your level, to indicate your level of agreement with the following statement. Does developing national systems and capacity development for sound chemicals should receive priority attentions in negotiating the Beyond 2020 instruments? Is this dimension a crucial aspect in the upcoming negotiations on the Beyond 2020 instruments? Do you strongly agree? Do you agree? Are you undecided? Do you disagree, or do you strongly disagree with this statement?
Yes, and I understand we have about, Gayon, 20 minutes time in the chat to interact on these questions. Can you advise a little bit, Gayon?
Yes, thank you. All participants may now move on to the chat to discuss the questions that have been presented. So please feel free to present your ideas and your responses on the questions presented. And also you can share your insights on the polls that has been just launched. So we have now 20 minutes to discuss in the chat.
Thank you.
We see here questions from Ahmad Madavi on that it was always proposed that chemicals management issues in developing countries get separate sections, discussions, and people. And we have as well questions from Ruth on the chemicals conversations and the discussion has not been integrated and mainstreamed, so many people and groups has not been included or participated. Perhaps Hakeem, you could respond most probably to this one, as it is emphasizing the importance of your integrated approach on how can we foster this inclusions of the various stakeholders to have a structured, consistent, coherent set of discussion and solid set of discussions to understand the complexity of the management of chemicals at the national level, not only at the international level, but as well at the national level. According to you, Hakeem, what needs to be done? What is the picture there? Is our structure at the national level so fragmented? What could be done in order to make it more coherent and influential to those who are managing the resources and those who needs to understand what is the cost of the inadequate management of chemicals at the national level? Back to you, Hakeem.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pierre, and thank you for these very interesting initial questions. I guess in the second and third part of this webinar, we are diving exactly into that question: how can we get chemical management into key industry sectors, into other sectors? How can we link it to the SDGs? But my question is also the following: is one of you mentioned it is not a priority in a developing country, and I would be curious to hear through the chat why is it not a priority? If anyone wants to explain that, because if we understand that better, I think it will help us to define the solutions better. The Global Chemicals Outlook referred to significant human health and environmental challenges, in particular in countries which do not have chemical management systems in place. So there is a toll, and we all know that, for example, lead in paint has significant impact even on GDP growth by impairing intellectual development of young children. So the costs are very high. Why is it not a priority? I mean, is it too complex? Do we lack the connections? Please help us to understand in the chat what the root causes could be.
We see, if I may help here, we see the lack of research on chemicals issues in developing countries that needs to be increased. We see that the lack of promotion of green alternative solutions is also affecting the capacity to make these chemicals management a priority at the national level. We see that the lack of reflections of industries and how they need also to internalize the cost of damages that needs to be done as well. So all these, I think, are a set of factors that could perhaps explain this lack of priority given to chemicals management at the national level. We see also that the support to capacity building, to the support to proper institutional strengthening, the finance needed for these capacity building, awareness raising, and to support alternatives is also lacking.
I'm seeing one interesting, in addition to the points you raised, Pierre, I see also one comment in the chat saying that the chemical sector in one country is not in support of a framework chemicals legislation, and that would be interesting to understand better, because we understand also from the global chemical industry that they are very supportive of countries establishing basic regulation and chemical management systems. So what are the impediments? And it would be nice also to hear from industry, what can be done to develop these systems. I'm curious just to understand better where this is coming from and what are the bottlenecks there.
But we can see that we have only in the result of our poll today, and thank you, Guyan, for putting it on screen, but only 3% are undecided on the importance of reflecting this national systems and capacity development for sound management of chemicals at national level should receive the priority attentions in our future instrument. 97% of our participants are giving a top priority for this issue. Thank you very much. Perhaps we can take away now the result of the poll in order to have a better read of the discussion.
And perhaps also, if you look now at the second question, I mean, in terms of finding solutions, how do we overcome some of the issues you have identified? That may also be good to learn. Maybe some success stories from countries where you have been able to overcome some of these barriers.
If we could have some experience here where the discussions at intersectoral level on the capacity to involve in this topic other key sectors such as health, or such as development sectors, or industry sectors, or agricultural sector, how this has taken place at the national level, that may have also helped significantly in achieving some progress in the national legislations process or institutional strengthening. If some had some experience in this regard, that would be welcome as well. Any attempt to perhaps, Hakim, in summarizing your views from all the points expressed here on this first dimension?
Yeah, I think it's a really insightful list that the participants are really have created here. I think it's more pointing out to the challenges than to the solutions. Although I'm seeing here also already some I think it's Ramsar, referring to the importance of moving forward in creating national chemical profile and move forward on a basic chemical safety policy as a first step. So there are clear calls for taking first step first. But I think that the range of items is very insightful, starting from the lack perhaps of scientific training to the lack of awareness-raising activities to some of the problems in setting up a basic chemical management system. And there still seems to be some in some countries, some forces not supporting that. The challenge of documenting the negative impacts and bringing other sectors on board, the lack of certification schemes. So I think it's a very rich list. And what we will do as a follow-up to this webinar, trying to see to what extent some of these issues have already been addressed in these international negotiations, or whether also then some of these points can be still revived in further work that the IMC or that some of you will do as we move towards Bonn.
Thank you very much, Hakim. We could perhaps now start to move to your second dimensions, key dimensions of this integrated chemicals and waste management, and this relates to the integrating chemicals management in key industry and value chain. I give you the floor, Hakim, to provide your background to this second dimension.
Okay, well, wonderful. So now we are really talking about the green dimension of this circular diagram, which really refers to the key industry sectors and product value chains. And there are potentially very many here. We just provided 3 as an example. Next one, please. So also in the global chemicals outlook too, some findings pointed at significant releases of chemicals not occurring during the production of chemicals, but really also in producing certain product in key downstream industry sectors, and also emissions, of course, occur during the use of products. And this is, I think, it's not a new finding, but the Global Chemicals Outlook really pointed out that in light of these emissions throughout the value chain and throughout the life cycle, further attention needed to be taken at the global level to address some of these releases. Here we have an initial list of what we initially referred to as chemical intensive industry sectors, agriculture and food production, automobiles, transport, construction, building, cosmetics, electronics, energy, and so on and so on. The term chemical intensive is still a term that we're trying to understand if that can be defined properly. So there's still some discussion on it, but I think there's clear understanding that we're talking here about the downstream industry sectors that use significant amounts of chemicals and therefore also face a risk of chemical releases. There are a number of sectors where I think a lot of work has been already done, also internationally. Of course, agriculture has the International Code of Conduct, jointly managed by FAO and WHO on the distribution and use of pesticides. The textile sector has also done a lot of work already to organize itself internationally to respond to consumer demand and also NGO campaigns to reduce emissions during the production and in products. So I think what we are trying to see also is how some of these lessons learned in these sectors can inform work at the global level and at the company level and at the association level in sectors which have maybe not taken yet a systematic approach to chemicals and waste management. Next slide, please. So here is also a slide that shows the linkages also of basic chemical management system and applying this really to the sectoral level. On the left, you're seeing the different sectors, which are using chemicals. And I think this slide is saying that in terms of assessing the health risk and environmental risk, it's important to look at the impact of workers' health. It's important to look at the health of citizens and consumers, and of course, it's important to look at the environmental dimension. That also means that at the country level, then the different sectors that Pierre alluded to need to be brought into this work, and this collectively could be a driver then to also identify non-regrettable alternatives. Identified also three green and sustainable chemistry solutions. So these are some very simple elements of a figure here. Of course, in practice, it's extremely complex, and that's perhaps also something where some countries with basic chemical management capacity may be struggling a bit, because in regions with sophisticated chemical management schemes, we know that there are hundreds of experts employed in government and thousands of experts employed in industry to go through such a process. Next one, please. But we are seeing that there is some front-runner industry action happening, and I think the idea of a global program on industry sector engagement is also to look at front-runner initiatives in terms of developing chemical policy, setting transparency standards, identifying systematically non-regrettable alternatives, developing industry standards that are setting a high benchmark. So these are all actions we have seen in some industries, but of course there are significant gaps to be filled. You have front runners, but you also have laggards. You're having some industries in certain regions who are advanced and others not yet. So I think a global program on this topic needs to work out how to foster knowledge sharing, how to create incentives that bring everybody on board in meeting a high standard, because the human being and the environment is the same all over the world. But there are challenges to go through. So this slide here just gives you a sense of some of the important actions front-runner chemical companies and downstream companies have done and may do. And here maybe just pointing out that the important instruments in place developed also with industry, such as sustainable supply chain management policies, extended producer responsibilities and life cycle assessments, which I think are both important tools that industry can promote and should promote, but also government has a role to play. Finally, I think the importance of disseminating good practices, including solutions, is key. And that could be all elements of a global program that would hopefully be adopted at ICCM5 on this topic. Next one, please. And the role of government enabling and creating enabling action is, of course, key. We have seen in some regions in the world that having clear sunset targets for certain chemicals can create momentum in the industry to innovate and move towards green and sustainable chemistry solutions. Government plays a key right in advancing consumer right to know policies and labeling schemes. Governments can use tax incentives to foster market shifts. They can put in principle in place to promulgate polluter pays policies. And if funding is available, to subsidize research and innovation to advance green and sustainable chemistry, this can accelerate the progress. And other government can also be leading by example and making sure that sustainable procurement policies and strategies are in place, which really minimize the purchase of any products that may still contain hazardous chemicals. So these enabling actions, both by industry and governments, are important. And of course, the role of non-governmental organizations in driving both industry and governments in advancing these measures is also key. And this is a big component of SAICM, that we have a strong NGO community that is keeping the other players on their feet. Next one, please. Yeah, so with this, I'm handing over to Pierre again for the second round of interactive chats. Pierre.
Yes, and I see that your background has already generated a significant amount of comments, and so some definitions will be needed on non-regrettable alternative, perhaps Hakim, but and please respond to these questions and provide your comments in the chat room. On the question 2, so scaling up engagement and actions of downstream industries such as the textile, electronics, constructions, and building industry is critical in achieving chemicals and waste management globally. Yet downstream industries have only played a limited role in SAICM and negotiating the strategic approach in chemicals and waste management beyond 2020. According to you, what incentives could be created to engage these actors more actively into our Beyond 2020 process? If we could get your response, your proposal on these questions, what incentives could be created to engage these actors, that would be greatly appreciated. Our polling questions that will be posted in 1 second is: indicate your level of agreement with the following statement. Integrating chemicals management in key industries and a value chain should receive priority attentions in negotiating the Beyond 2020 instruments. Do you strongly agree? Do you agree? Are you undecided? Do you disagree, or do you strongly disagree? And as for the first questions, we have about 20 minutes for responding to this questions, to these 2 sets of questions. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, perhaps Hakim, while people are posting their proposal with regards to incentives and responding to the poll, could you perhaps provide few more definitions on regrettable alternatives, your views on the difference between chemicals and chemicals products? You've been very involved on these two issues. Your views and further details on these would be appreciated, Hakim.
Okay. Yeah, on the question of non-regrettable substitution, that's of course a very complex topic, and I think there is some appetite also internationally to have more robust criteria of what it means. I give you one example of an initiative by the United Nations Environment Assembly that has requested UNEP to develop a framework, a manual defining or getting a better understanding what do we mean also by green and sustainable chemistry innovation and solutions. And some of the discussion on sustainable chemistry has taken place also in the context of the early negotiations of the Beyond 2020 instrument. And it always turns out to be not an easy discussion. But what we have been able to do at the global level, we have started to develop kind of 10 benchmark criteria to assess any innovation if it meets a green and sustainability considerations. And these 10 guiding consideration or principles draw upon some of the principles of green and sustainable chemistry that were developed in the United States by John Warner and Paul Anestis some years ago, but that focus really on the chemistry innovation, the dimension. And these 10 principles also bring in broader sustainability criteria. So if you are interested in reading this, there is a framework manual available on the UNEP website and includes these 10 criteria. Now they range from basic chemistry considerations to broader issues. So, for example, the first criteria, if I control directly, it says, minimize or design chemicals with a minimal hazard property. So that is a guiding principle for researchers to not necessarily just invent the most effective chemical to provide a function, but to invent a chemical that can provide a function by minimizing the chemical hazard. That's the basic, that comes from green chemistry and is meant to encourage all innovators, but also policymakers when they look at particular products and their properties. Other principle and guiding considerations are, taking a life cycle approach, so that also when you invent chemistry, you're already looking at the ability to be recyclable, also not contaminate products, so that the circular economy is not impeded. And it ranges to the question, does actually the chemistry innovation make a contribution to the implementation of societal challenges such as climate change and addressing some of the key development issues outlined in the 2030 agenda. And here, I think a major principle also comes in, which is avoiding trade-offs. Because we do not want, for example, to have chemistry contribute to one sustainable development goal, for example, meeting climate change goals, but at the same time increase perhaps hazardous chemicals and expose human beings and the environment with that. So here, really, the three dimensions of sustainable development come in. It has to be meeting environmental and health considerations. It has to meet social needs, and it has to make economic sense. It's not either or, it's all. So avoiding trade-offs is important. Secondly, also, we see now that as governments restrict the use or ban a certain type of chemicals, for example, of PFAS, there are then new chemicals being invented which have very similar properties. So therefore, also, I think non-regrettable solutions also means that any new chemistry innovation it's not just tweaking a little molecule here, but really looks at fundamental alternatives of achieving a certain function. In the PFAS case, we have seen then that new PFAS were then put on the market, and now they're being assessed because they're having very similar property as the ones that were banned. So this non-regrettable substitution topic is a very complex one. And if you want to read more about it, there's the UNEP Green and Sustainable Chemistry Manual, but there's also very interesting work done by the OECD providing a state-of-the-art analysis of alternative assessment techniques which have been used around the world. Long answer to a short question, Pierre.
Thank you very much. This is very important, and I would like to thank also with regards to your response, Michel Bloor, for putting on the chat room access also to the green chemistry principles, the 12 principles of green chemistry. Thank you. But we see here that on your non-regrettable alternatives, that what seems to be important is that there is a linkage is established between all the actors all along the value chain, and this is something that is very important in your second dimension in integrated chemicals management in key industries and the value chain. That it means if we don't put in connections all these actors from the researchers, from the producers to the users, through to the consumers, through the users and retailers and so on, it will be very difficult to achieve major progress on this. Results of our polls on should these dimensions be a priority within our considerations and recommendations for the Beyond 2020 instrument. And we see a good, again here, more than 90% are agreeing, with a good 53% strongly agreeing. That's quite important. I think, Akim, of these 53% strongly agreeing, and so that this focus on the key industry intensive, chemicals intensive sectors throughout the value chain could be very, very important. And we will need to frame these dimensions very, very well, as it seems very promising from the views of this community of practice. Any reactions you have on these percentages, Akim?
No, this is very encouraging that the participants in this webinar support, some of the thinking that the IMC is bringing into the international discussions. I think maybe at the end of this webinar, we can have also dialogue. Also, what can the participants in this webinar do to help generate the momentum on this topic? I mentioned there is a global workshop organized by IMC in June. So if you're interested to join that workshop, I'm sure we can send around more information about it. Right now, UNITA is inviting interested participants to indicate. You need to work towards also some documentation for ICCM5 on this topic. So anyone here in this webinar that feels wants to engage, please do so. So I hope that beyond the intellectual exchange we have at this webinar, we can continue the momentum, I think, that's now being generated on this important dimension of integrated chemical management. Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you. And we can see from the incentives from our forum this afternoon that the relationships between the scientific assessment capacity to understand really what are the implications, the impact of these chemicals needs to be understood, but also how incentives and tax exemptions or polluters pay principles on the other side would be important also in changing the component and changing the behavior all along the value chain seems very important. How code of conduct also for each actors could be developed is also being proposed. So we see that there is this scientific capacity, this innovative aspect from the industry itself, and also all these needs to be accompanied by the proper policy measures and fiscal measures as well, should be perhaps all put together in a coherent way that could constitute somehow what you have proposed in your schemes, Akim. Any reactions on all these proposals and on incentives as proposed by our participant today? From you, Akim, you have the floor.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you, Pierre. Very interesting inputs there. And I think we have some homework to do to review all these ideas after the webinar.
Yes. It's very rich. And thank you very much all for these very precise and very interesting, stimulating set of proposals with regards to incentives. So I understand that if we don't have any further wrap-up to be done, could we move perhaps to the third dimensions of your integrated approach, Akim? Your integrated approach that you share so well with our IOMC colleagues. The third dimension on integrated chemicals management with sustainable development initiatives. Your first remark and background informations are welcome at this stage. Akim, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. So now we're talking about the red little line on the bottom, the third dimension, which is really looking at the question of the SDGs and how chemistry, chemical management and waste management relates to it. If I may go to the next slide. So you're all familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals framework, and there are a number of targets which, of course, do not refer to chemicals and waste management, but there are clear linkages. biodiversity is one example, and the recent framework that I just mentioned that was adopted, in December of last year, starts to look into the question of how also contamination of air, water, and land affects negatively biodiversity. So I think some of these governance systems are starting to look at these linkages. We also have, of course, the process coming out of the Paris Agreement, looking at climate change mitigation strategy, and of course, innovation in chemistry is a key to many of these innovations. Solar panels, windmill blades that can be recycled and have lighter materials. So there are a lot of these linkages. Clean water, chemistry being used to disinfect water, used in water treatment plants, and so on and so on and so on. So quite a number of environmental sustainability topics have that linkage. The second type of sustainability topics we refer to as the socioeconomic topics. There are a number of SDG talking about industrial development, the world of work, green job creation, workers' protection, health, gender, and so on. So, these mechanisms, or the kind of the bodies that discuss implementation of these topics are not necessarily thinking chemicals and waste management 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. So similar as for the environmental topics, how can the Beyond 2020 constituency that will meet in Bonn, how can action be taken to take the importance of chemicals and waste management to these other fora? And the third group of topics, and the same challenge applies to that, is the enabling topics such as education programs, research and innovation programs. Again, how can we take the importance of chemistry, or sound management, green and sustainable chemistry into these mechanisms? It is easily said that it's valuable to do so, but what the third dimension is proposing, including a possible program on it, to take a bit more systematic approach and identifying the key SDG topics to really work out what is the chemistry and waste management dimension, and to figure out what fora do meet internationally, but also nationally, where some of these insights could be mainstreamed. So the third area is important, but perhaps a bit more challenging, as this is new territory. But we as an IMC believe that programmatic action is needed, such as maybe a series of studies at the global level to look at these linkages in a systematic way, identifying arguments so that those working on chemicals and waste management convince the experts in the other bodies that they should look at sustainable chemistry in a more systematic way, and also that they create the funding needed for innovation and education program, so that the chemistry of the future is not repeating any of the mistakes that were made in the past. So it is about a bit of an intellectual exercise, but ultimately it is meant to change discussions in other fora. What can be done by Beyond 2020 to accelerate this? This is the key challenge on this third topic. Next one. So with this short introduction, over to you, Pierre, to read out the discussion question on this topic.
Thank you, and thank you for reminding us, Akim, that either as an input or a consequence of activities, our SMC, our sound management of chemicals and waste, can provide practical solutions to achieve sustainable development. And with the questions today, before asking you the polling questions, but the implementations of several SDGs, such as those addressing climate change, biodiversity, the world of work, innovations, etc., depend on the sound management of chemicals and waste. Yet, relevant international fora do not pay full attention to these linkages. What are, according to you, the most important relevant SDGs, and what needs to be done to integrate chemicals and waste management's considerations in relevant bodies and fora? This is the first question, and please provide your views in our chat room. And could we have the polling questions on the screen, please? And if you could indicate your level of agreements with the following statement: integrating chemicals management with sustainable development initiatives should receive priority attentions in our negotiating beyond 2020 instruments. Do you strongly agree? Do you agree? Are you undecided? Do you disagree, or do you strongly disagree? And again, we will have approximately 20 minutes to answer the poll, and also to receive your views on the questions. What are the most important relevant SDGs, and what needs to be done to integrate chemicals and waste management's considerations in relevant bodies and fora? How can we exert a greater influence on these other important sectors? Thank you very much. And we see already that the business and human rights dimensions needs also to be reflected in this in this effort to integrate chemicals management and waste with sustainable development initiatives. Some options are presented here. Should we focus on standards for identifying safer and greener chemicals? Or should we have develop some framework for evaluating the risks for chemicals in products? Should we have chemicals footprint reporting on a priority basis? Should we create an IPCC-like group of experts? And here perhaps, Akim, we could provide some efforts with the science policy panel that has just been developed.
Yes, I think the identification of priority chemicals is a very important topic, and also the global framework on beyond 2020 has a strategic objectives as a draft to identify issues of concern. And as Pierre pointed out, there is right now an effort ongoing to develop a global panel that does similar work as we have seen by the International Panel on Climate Change in the climate change area, and also by IPBES in the biodiversity area. So this is being negotiated, and hopefully it will raise some issues to the top level. But at the same time, also, I think that we need to understand that regional and national initiatives have a priority list of chemicals already in place. For example, the list under the European REACH legislation on substances of very high concern. We see that in some of the industry sector initiatives, also there are priority chemicals already being identified. For example, the Zero Discharge of Hazardous Chemicals initiative dealing with the textile sector has priority chemicals that it clearly wants to target towards phase out. So I think there's a wide range of priority setting mechanisms out there, anywhere now from this new global panel to government initiatives to also the non-governmental organizations who are publishing lists such as the one published by ChemSec. So I think it provides a wealth of different reference points that also developing countries can look at these efforts and try to see what type of chemicals are likely also to cause problems under conditions of use in their particular regions and local settings.
Thank you, Akim. And we see from our participants that a number of SDGs have been highlighted. We see, of course, the SDG 12s on responsible consumptions and productions that directly relates to the sound management of chemicals. But we see as well also the SDG 3 on good health and well-being, as well as SDG 9 on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. We see also others that I remember seeing. It was on water management, SDG 6. We see in the SDG 5 on achieving gender equality being highlighted. Perhaps we could remind our participants here, Akim, the brochure that was created by IOMC a few years ago on the chemicals and waste management essential to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which we are showing the different level of direct and explicit relationships, indirect relationships with all the SDGs, and with some language and statistics explaining how they play. The sound management of chemicals and waste is a key factor for achieving the SDGs, with small explanations. That could be helpful also in working again on from this brochure to further highlight these relationships and these integrations of chemicals management within sustainable development initiatives. Akim, any reactions on these various SDGs and what, according to what is being suggested here, could help us in exerting a greater level of influence within these other sectors, within this other field of work that seems important? Perhaps we could ask our participants whether focusing on these the second dimensions on focusing on these key intensive chemical intensive sectors could perhaps raise the attention and interest of other important actors in climate change, in biodiversity, and within the investment communities and so on, could also perhaps increase their engagement in our SAICM process.
Yeah, from what I'm seeing here by the inputs is that I think that many SDGs are relevant, and I think it will be extremely difficult to say one is more important than the other. So I think just keeping all the SDGs in mind, and as you said, the brochure that IMC did lists some of them, but also working to the next level, and for each SDG think through the linkages in more detail, so that those working on gender equality, those NGOs, can maybe try to put some knowledge together on this. Those working on research programs can put some knowledge together. And this is what we are trying to get through the global program. We try to get to the next level of these questions and identifying target audiences. So perhaps rather than saying only 3 are important, we are recognizing the many, but we're also working with stakeholders and actors who help to think through the linkages, and that could be then developed into training materials, into guidance materials, so that also national SAICM focal points can use those arguments to reach out to other actors in the national government and in the stakeholder community. So that's my take on the first question, what I'm getting here from the discussion.
Yeah, and we see from all our participants that we still have our little 3% of undecided, but that we have 97% strongly agreeing that this dimension should be also a priority. in providing recommendations on the Beyond 2020 instrument, with a good 58% that strongly agree. That's very important. Again, this is a dimension that is a little bit more subtle than the other ones to be effectively addressed. Perhaps also, at the scientific level, being able to measure the impact between the health and the environment one, and on this being able to perhaps provide some evaluations of the cost of inactions, the cost on the sectors that are externalized so far, and that end up being paid either by the health sector or the environmental one, with expensive remediation actions. If we were able to provide perhaps a better understanding and capacity to measure these costs of inactions in order to justify preventive actions and investment on these preventive actions at the outset, really to further reduce the cost of remediation action. That could be also a very efficient way to be considered by these or other sectors, and in the priorities of development, sustainable development strategies that receives most of the times more resources than we do the chemicals and waste management sectors.
If I may ask participants to also think a little bit about just the second one, because we are also thinking through in the IMC what could be the elements of a global program on this. So if you have any ideas about activities that could be done at the global level under Beyond 2020 to make progress on all these questions, and also to have results, as Pierre said. Although in this case the results would be intermediate. The result would be that perhaps in 2 or 3 years, discussions under the Paris Agreement fully take into account chemicals and waste issues. I mean, that would be an intermediate result, by getting the message into other fora. So how do we get there? Any brilliant ideas are always welcome, or any good ideas, any idea.
You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, the last point here by Ramsa on sustainable financing, that is a key topic, and that we will also address in the workshop coming up in June. How can we get institutional investors to integrate chemicals and waste issues into their funding portfolios? There are a number of actors out there, pension funds and banks, who are ready to do so, but it's just a little seed that's being planted. So how can we get this finance sector community participate more actively in chemicals and waste management and create a whole global network around it? Thank you, Ram, for mentioning that very important SDG.
And I would highlight also the suggestions from Ahmad on getting new 18 SDGs for chemicals management. That will be surely difficult, but that was very much considered while the SDGs were being developed, and there was an opportunity here, rather than focusing on the little brother of all the SDGs, the last one, and the orphan of these big other issues. Strategically, it was interesting to perhaps consider that chemicals management is crucial for the achievement of all these other SDGs and should be considered as an essential element, and so adequately funded. But we need to make the case. We need to make the investment case in order to receive the attentions, the policy attentions, and to get also the needed financial support. both for making the case and both for having the proper actions undertaken at the national and international level. We see the important role that the chemicals industry should play first, and that's being fully considered in this integrated approach by giving greater emphasis to these chemicals intensive sectors throughout the value chains. We hope that this will be an important factors of change in getting attentions again from investors. If we had here the chemicals industry committing in providing innovative solutions, technology promises that could match also the policy measures that are needed to make sure that it's all working within a well balanced frame. Perhaps investors would be there, and financial partners would find this approach much more strategic than the previous one, and would pitch in providing the necessary capacity to all the actors at the national level, and also involving the NGO community in better understanding what are the impact and the potential solutions also. I see that we are not far from reaching the end of our community of practice today, so it might be the time for a wrap-up, general wrap-up on our discussion today. Would you provide your attempt at this exercise, Akim?
Yeah, perhaps we can say also a little bit about the next steps on some of these ideas. I mean, can we show the next slide? So really, what is happening now to take these ideas, initially mentioned by the IMC, put into an INF paper, and we'll make sure we send the link to the group of the INF paper. There was one question. I tried to do it here, but I didn't figure it out and almost lost the whole chat. But we'll make sure we do it. But you know, we're moving in now beyond that, and what can we do through in the implementation of this idea? And what really encouraged us, if I may say, is the great support by this community that met today to all the three dimensions. It's not that you singled out one versus the other. You, I think, encouraged all of us to continue working along all three lines. For those who are interested in more detail, the IMC also submitted at the recent intersessional meeting in Nairobi a conference room paper called Proposal to Include Implementation Programs in the Beyond 2020 Framework to help achieve the Beyond 2000 strategic objectives and targets. And what's actually nice is that some of the draft objectives being negotiated are very close to the elements discussed by the IMC in the integrated approach. So one objective really focuses on national system. One objective really encourages development of alternatives by downstream industry sectors through the value chain. And one objective also is trying to promote decision-making in all fora to take into account chemicals as waste consideration. So the CRP is now making suggestions on programs. And if you are a stakeholder in the SAICM process, or it's never too late to get involved, yeah, we would hope that you also give us ideas or also share your ideas at ICCM5 on the importance of these programs. I mentioned already the workshop in June on program number 2 on industry sector engagement. So definitely let us know if you have any interest to join. But otherwise, I think we have to see if this idea of program implementation gets full ownership at ICCM5. The programs just that IMC is suggesting are not meant to be major new bureaucratic structures. They are light mechanisms to promote implementation to facilitate knowledge sharing, to track progress on some of the targets and indicators that speak to the programs. So it is meant to be a catalyzing mechanism rather than a large new vehicle that would create a lot of time to negotiate and find funding for. So this light programmatic implementation is something we promote, and we'll discuss this also at the June workshop, how stakeholders will react to this. So just a plea to all of those who supported the 3 dimensions to continue to stay involved, share your ideas. We will carefully go through the chat and distill from it what we can take from it, as we also as IMC take these ideas forward. But also with this, I mean, from my side, it has been a real pleasure to support this webinar and see all of you being so active in responding to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hakim, for these concluding remark, for encouraging us to, how could we phrase it, perhaps to unleash the catalytic power of the intersectoral nature of our SAICM. In this new framework, we have a unique opportunity to really promote this center of interest that we all share in this chemicals management. I think we all share that we have all the capacity and somehow the resources are there to really make a difference and demonstrate how chemicals and waste management can help us to achieve our sustainability agenda. This is what we will have to be discussed at this ICCM5 and at our IP4-3 now intersessional meeting that will be held next September in Bonn. I invite you all to, of course, join us to Bonn in next September, and to help us frame this new instrument. It is time now for me to thank you all for your time and very interesting proposals, recommendations, views in this discussions today. I would like to thank the Green Growth Knowledge Platform, the Green Forum, all our partners, our wonderful Gayan and her colleague in facilitating these discussions. I hope that you will join us in the next round also of this community of practice. You see that we are changing the focus a bit of this community of practice to align ourselves with the evolutions of the discussion in light of this integrated approach. And that's very encouraging, seeing the level of interest and the quality of the inputs that you provided today. We are strongly encouraged to further our efforts in this direction, and we look forward to seeing you soon. And you can continue our discussion in our online forum, as Stephanie just proposed in the chat room. Thank you very, very much again, and we look forward to seeing you in the next round of discussions within this set of community of practice, and of course, within our SAICM intersessional process and at ICCM5 in Bonn. Thank you very much.